The Senate will come back to order. I'd ask that all unauthorized persons exit the chamber. We'll now take up House Bill 481. Before we read the caption, I'd like to remind us to remind those in the gallery that the Senate gallery is in place for the public to observe the Senate, and that shouting, applause, boos, hisses, or loud conversation that disturbs the Senate is prohibited. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of House Bill 481?
House Bill 481 by Representative Setzler of the 35th and others, a bill will be titled an Act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 1 of the OCGA relating to persons and their rights, to amend Article 5 of Chapter 12 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to abortion, to amend Chapter 9A of Title 31 of the OCGA relating to the Woman's Right to Know Act, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Science and Technology offers the following substitute to House Bill 481. A bill will be titled an Act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 1 of the OCGA relating to persons and their rights, so as to provide that natural persons include an unborn child, to provide that such unborn children shall be included in certain population-based determinations, to provide definitions, to amend Article 5 of Chapter 12 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to abortion, so as to provide definitions, to revise the time when an abortion may be performed, to provide for exceptions, to provide for the requirements for performing an abortion, to provide for a right of action and damages, to provide for affirmative defenses, to amend Chapter 6 of Title 19 of the OCGA relating to alimony and child support, so as to provide a definition, to provide a maximum support obligation for certain circumstances, to amend Chapter 7 of Title 19 of the OCGA relating to parent and child relationship generally, so as to provide that the right to recover for the full value of a child begins at the point when a detectable human heartbeat exists, and for other purposes. Mr. President, a minority report was filed. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
For what purpose does the senator from the 41st rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President.
State your inquiry.
What would be the proper time to raise a point of order that House Bill 481, which has a tax implication due to tax credit and other reasons, would need a fiscal note?
The time would be now to raise that inquiry.
Point of order, Mr. President.
State your point of order.
HB 481 requires a fiscal note, and I request that be placed on the desk.
Senate will stand at ease for a moment while the chair considers.
request that that be placed on the desk.
Senate will stand at ease for a moment while the chair considers. Senate will come back to order. Thank you for your patience. The chair is prepared to rule the immediate effect of the bill itself does not have significant impact on the anticipated expenditure level of the state. As such, Senate Rule 3-1.4 and OCGA 28-5-42 does not apply. The Senate may now proceed. State your inquiry.
Would it be appropriate at this time to challenge the decision of the chair? I feel that it is quite certain this bill has significant financial impact.
It would be appropriate. The chair has ruled that the immediate effect of the bill itself does not have significant impact on the anticipated expenditure level of the state. The question is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? All those in favor of the chair vote yea, opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. For what purpose does the senator from the 45th rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that we're asking for an upvote for a green vote on this particular motion?
I'm certain the senator knows of what she speaks. Green vote sustains the ruling of the chair.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th. For what purpose do you rise?
Isn't it true with respect to
For
this
what
bill?
purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that with respect to this, we've just learned from Legislative Counsel that this will impact Medicaid programs and every other program in this state and also costing over $20 million with respect to tax exemptions?
I believe that's for each and every senator to determine on their own. For what purpose does the senator from the 48th rise?
Inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that the sponsor on the House side of this bill testified before the committee that this would cost $10 to $20 million?
I'm sure the senator knows of what she speaks. On the appeal of the ruling of the chair, the yeas are 30, the nays are 14, and the ruling of the chair is sustained. At this time, the chair would like to recognize the senator from the 45th to speak to House Bill 481.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the debate already beginning. I can see how it's going to
work out. Look forward to a good debate. Courage. Courage. Much has been documented in history books about men having courage, especially valid documented war stories about men in the battlefield who were willing to sacrifice their own life to protect their own families, their own country. Many soldiers have died because of their bravery, and we thank all of those who have served or currently serve. Your courage is appreciated. Today, I want to talk about another kind of courage. Courage that is not just courageous, just a different type of courage, but equally bold. It is the courage of motherhood. My daddy always told me I was special. I was always a daddy's girl. He taught me hunting and fishing, competitiveness as an athlete, and most importantly, strength to endure anything. My mama always told me I was different. I could never figure it out. I bet y'all can't either. Why was my daddy so encouraging, but my mama not so much? She knew I was different. She had raised 5 kids and multiple grandchildren. She knew in her heart, Renee is different. My mother knew I was different than my sister. I knew when I became a teenager that my mama was right. She explained it to my dad. Renee has female trouble. Back then, you didn't talk about reproductive health like we are today. Just female trouble in the old South. And some of y'all probably say that now. It's just the way it was back then. When I was 18 years old, I had my first surgery to remove a ruptured ovarian cyst and also had a large, very large benign tumor on it. I had 2 subsequent abdominal surgeries. Then when I was just 22 years old, I had a total abdominal hysterectomy. I quit college. I was devastated. I was barren. The rest of my life lay before me as a woman with no children and no hope. And y'all know, everyone in here, how much I adore children. And it was my goal and my dream to become the best mother ever. The worst part lay before me, and I had no idea. I was going through menopause because I was not placed on hormone replacement therapy. I suffered depression. My hair fell out. I looked emaciated. I was only 25 years old, but I looked 50 years old. Fortunately, when I was 28 years old, I finally got help. I met an endocrinologist who took me off the roller coaster ride. He started me on hormone replacement therapy. And now, and I know I'm going to cry, and I'm sorry if I cry, and now the shining light at the end of the tunnel, and why I am passionately compelled to be pro-life, and why I have been a consistent advocate for more and better health care for women, unlike the health care that I had. I have seen courage eyeball to eyeball. It must rival any battlefield courage that men talk about. It is the ability of one mother to hand over their tiny, swaddled, brand new newborn and essentially let go, giving life to another mother. A mother who craves life, who is awaiting another heartbeat to cherish, to love, and give every ounce of energy for that newborn to have a better life. The adopted mother witnesses courage, strength, and dignity from the birth mother. Y'all know I'm going to cry when I talk about my kids. It is the story of Zach, whose name is Zechariah, and Rachel, who is Rahel. All of you that know about them because you know they're the love of my life. Zach was a closed adoption. I never knew his 16-year-old mother who gave birth on an Air Force base. Zach was born for 4 weeks premature, had failure to thrive, and had low birth weight. Within a month of when I brought him back home, I had to take him back to Eggleston Hospital where he stayed for a while. A special needs child his whole life. I will never forget getting on the Delta plane. I cried for 4 hours home. And the pilot, everybody on the plane knew what was going on, that I was a newborn mother. And when I got off the plane, the pilot announced, he said, "Baby Zach is home." He let me get off the plane first, and everybody on the plane clapped. I still have Zach's Delta wings. They're on a satin heart pillow that I keep on my bed. Rachel was an open adoption. Knowing that birth mother and going on the journey with her during her pregnancy was completely different. Listening to the heartbeat and knowing that heartbeat was going to be mine. There is absolutely no words that can explain that elation. Being in the delivery room and watching the sacrifice that birth mother was enduring, and then the next morning, the birth mother handed me that bundled swaddle of joy, of pureness. She cried, I cried, we cried together. The blanket was wet with tears. Tears of sadness, tears of joy, tears of fear, tears for the future of Rachel. Courage to let go, courage to assure a better life. And that's the same courage that I began with, the courage to let go. I've never told my personal story. I've told all of y'all about Zach and Rachel. But this isn't about me. This is about women and their personal journey. Sometimes sadness, sometimes tragedy, but sometimes joy. But one thing for sure, because we share one common, unique trait. Women have that inner strength. We have that inner courage. We have that inner resilience. And we have that ability to muster courage when we have to. And I have to tell you, it's taken me a lot to get up here and do this. There are thousands of women in Georgia who possess courage when it comes to the gift of life in their womb. One of them is a woman named Kristen from Madison, Georgia. She was going to come today and sit in the gallery with me. But y'all know what happens. You can't find a babysitter. Kristen first heard her child's heartbeat when she became pregnant with baby Cam 4 years ago. When she offered the chance to listen to Cam's heartbeat and see her photos in utero, Kristen knew her child was a precious life, a gift from God. Sadly, when seeing her doctor 13 weeks later, her child was diagnosed with a rare deformity that produces an abnormal small brain. Kristen was told her baby probably would never make it to birth, let alone live many days outside the womb. But Kristen had faith and courage. She said, "Who am I to say that Cambry couldn't do what any other child can do and live?" And that's what I said about Zach. So she trusted God and rejected every call for an abortion from her friends, from her obstetrician, from her specialist. No one had any hope for a child with microlissencephaly, which is as debilitating as cerebral palsy, but Kristen did. Today, Cambry is not only still with us, but a joy to Kristen's life. They celebrate every day and have with Cam's, despite the fact that she was born with a tiny brain and is physically and developmentally delayed. She is perfect. She is perfect just the way she is, Kristen says. Now that's courage. A mom who heard a heartbeat, was overjoyed with love, and has a special needs child that is making a difference in one couple's life. That, my colleagues, is why we as Georgians are not like New York or Virginia. We will not throw away these children who are not perfect, because all children are perfect in the eyes of God. Kristen, I want to thank you. I know you're watching from home on the live stream. And yes, you are one of those courageous ones giving so much to take care of the child that you love. I want to thank all the women who have taken the time to call or write, and there's been quite a few on both sides of the issue. But let me just start out by saying thank you. Thank you to the police officers that were in the room. I know we have the Georgia State Patrol and we have the Capitol Police. They've been here with us every step of the way this session, and we appreciate you every single day. We had public testimony with 64 individuals entered into the Science and Technology Committee records in a 4.5-hour Senate hearing. It is very much appreciated. Many folks drove a long ways to come to the Capitol for the very first time because I asked them. I didn't ask them to come, they just came. But what I want you to know, and there's people watching out there now in the halls, this is the people's building. It's your beautiful building, and we're glad you came, no matter what side of the aisle that you're on. The Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act provides findings by the General Assembly that the state of Georgia recognizes the benefits of providing full legal recognition of an unborn child above the minimum required federal law. The bill defines that a natural person is any human being, including an unborn child. Detectable human heartbeat is described as the steady and repetitive rhythmic contraction of the heart within the gestational sac. Personally, I know about the heartbeat as a former cardiovascular nurse. I've been in those hospital rooms when the heartbeat stops. Unfortunately, many, many times holding a loved one's hand. Every time it gave me a better appreciation of life and the courage to defend the life of the unborn child. This bill includes 4 exceptions: a medical emergency. If the probable gestational period is at 20 weeks or less, the pregnancy is due to incest or rape, and a police report has been filed alleging the same. Or if a physician determines the pregnancy is medically futile. I've had many people write to me about that question, and that is included in the bill. Medical aid must be rendered to the child if the abortion results in a child capable of sustained life. The bill requires that all abortions be performed by a licensed physician, and any abortion after the first trimester must be performed in a licensed hospital, ambulatory surgical center, or abortion facility. Any woman subject to an abortion where the physician or facility violated these laws can recover for damages in civil action. Affirmative defenses from prosecution for licensed physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and physician assistants providing care which results in accidental or unintentional injury or death of an unborn child. The bill further provides an affirmative defense from prosecution for women that sought an abortion who reasonably believe that an abortion was the only way to prevent a medical emergency. The bill provides recovery for direct medical expenses and pregnancy-related expenses from the father. Children in the womb also qualify as a dependent minor for tax purposes. This is much like the tax credit for a live birth. The Life Act also updates something that I'm very proud of, and I talked about this at the beginning of the session. Fortunately, I helped write the Women's Right to Know, and it took us almost a year working with Department of Public Health and then Department of Human Services to be able to formulate and publish this book, and I think it did a great job. It's been handed out to not hundreds but thousands of people. The provisions of the Life Act are effective January 1st, 2020. Y'all excuse me. I would like to address some of the issues that I have repeatedly heard in the last few weeks. First, yes, Georgia is one of the lowest ranking states in the nation for infant and maternal mortality. I only wish the critics that are out there in the hall would work as hard as we have to improve these statistics, like the Senate Health and Human Services and the House Health and Human Services Committee. And also, let's don't forget about Governor Nathan Deal and First Lady Sandra Deal and what they did before they left. Fortunately, now we have a new governor, Brian Kemp, whose mission is also to help Georgia families. Thank goodness for Governor Kemp for your commitment during the campaign. We all say things on the campaign, but now it's boots on the ground, improving infant and maternal mortality rates. In 2016, and some of y'all were here and some of you went with me, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Academy of State Health Policy, the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, and other groups, I couldn't even write them all down, targeted Georgia and other southern states with equally dismal statistics. We were targeted. We knew we were targeted. We were glad we were targeted. We wanted to improve. We developed a statewide plan, and it was called Improving Quality and Access to Care in Maternal and Child Health. The Department of Public Health, legislators, and various institutions in Georgia participated. We are on a mission. We started that mission years ago, but we're still. And yes, we are making steady improvements in changing our healthcare delivery systems and infrastructure. We've also consistently added, and I purposely have spent the last week, and I want to thank the Senate Budget Office, in the last 5 years, millions of dollars have gone into family, women, and infant health programs. So I went through the budget. And you're welcome. You're welcome. I went through 5 years worth of the budget. And I want you, because there's been so much criticism about this, to understand how much money we've actually put into the budget and how hard we're working. This is just from the 2019 budget. Women's health, family planning programs. I heard from lots of women who said, why don't you put more money into contraceptives and family planning? We put in $15,772,580 in the 2019 budget. Family planning program offers reproductive health care services designed to provide women support with planning, when to have children, reducing unintended pregnancies, determine effective birth control methods, and improving family well-being. Maternal mortality funds, rural birthing facilities for the purpose of implementing perinatal quality care improvement initiatives to improve maternal and neonatal outcomes in Georgia. I'm going to go down the list, and I want you to listen. It's remarkable how much money. Injury prevention, $550,000 in the 2019 budget. This purchases equipment such as child safety seats, bike helmets, smoke detectors, and other things. I can't even read them all. Babies Can't Wait. Everybody's heard about Babies Can't Wait. $24,973,000 provides a coordinated, comprehensive, and integrated system of care for infants and toddlers with special needs, just like that baby we were just talking about. Children medical services, $12,680,003. Families caring for children with special needs care needs. Children's First. Children's First facilitates early identification of at-risk children and links them with early intervention services. And my favorite, because this is what Zach suffered from, autism. In this year's budget, as you know, we have consistently funded autism. $1,614,000. Early identification, screening, diagnosis, early intervention, and family support for children suspected of having or diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Home visiting, $11 million. Genetic sickle cell, the minority party always lobbies, and thank goodness you do lobby for that. But $2,661,000, and I put that money in the budget to provide medical genetic services that include evaluation, treatment, and disease management for children diagnosed with heritable disorders. Infant and child oral health, $3,479,000. Perinatal maternal health, $2,194,000. Perinatal services are focused on health of the women and babies before, during, and after birth. And I can tell you one of the best experiences I ever had was going to Albany, Georgia, about 5 years ago, I think it was. And I went to the very first pregnancy centering program in the state of Georgia. We put it in Southwest Georgia because we knew that was the highest incident of infant and maternal mortality. And I can tell you that was the pilot program, and guess what? We've expanded that program. It is so successful. I actually went through the program with a group of pregnant women. Regional tertiary care centers, $1,578,000. Comprehensive child health, $9 million. So for the 2019 budget, just this budget alone, $90,896,944,000. But I want to tell you about some other money, and I hate to be talking about money, but this is what the critics kept repeatedly bringing up. We're not doing anything. The OBs that are out in the hall, the senator from Bainbridge from the 11th, he always helps with the OBGYN residency program. Over 5 years, we've put in $1 million for that program. The FQHCs, everybody in this room wants an FQHC in their region. We have expanded them. We have put $3.5 million. Medicaid add-on payment for newborn delivery in rural counties. This is the OBs who said, we can't even turn the lights on. We're going to quit seeing the Medicaid babies. We can't even keep our office doors open. So what did the state do? The state stepped in. The state stepped in, and we reimbursed them at a higher rate in these rural counties, and that accounted for $1.3 million. Medicaid reimbursement for evidence-based group perinatal care, $500,000 in 2019. So as you can see, the list goes on and on. I mean, I could have gone into child welfare reform. I could have gone into the literacy program. There's no way. And thank goodness, like I said, Governor Deal and now Brian Kemp, he's stepping up to the plate. We're all elevating these services together. And we need to be very proud of it. We've worked hard, and we're going to work harder. And we are committed to these women with access to care and keeping these babies alive. So, I'm going to show you 5 years. I went back 5 years. In 5 years, it totaled $117 million. The second criticism I've heard was the number of OBs leaving Georgia. Well, let me tell you, the OBs aren't going to rural Georgia. They're not going to rural Georgia. You know, you want to know where the OBs go, and I don't blame them. They go where there's a reimbursement stream. They go to Roswell, they go to Alpharetta, they go to Marietta, they go to Lawrenceville, and they go to Fayetteville, because that's where they get an insurance reimbursement. They do not go down to Dr. Karen Kinzel, who works in Clay County in the 1960s Tasty Freeze. They aren't going down there to help Dr. Kinzel. They're not going down there. And lastly, because I know we're going to go down this rabbit hole. I know we're going. I'm waiting to go down the rabbit hole with you. The Medical Association of Georgia sent out a letter, said they opposed this legislation. Let me tell you, they've opposed me on a lot of things. And you know what? By golly, I'm glad they have opposed me on a lot of things, because you know why? I'm standing up for the patient. I'm standing up for the consumer. And if I have to get on top of this building, on top of this gold dome, and dance up and down every day for the consumer, you better believe I'm going to do it. And I have fought them tooth and nail, and so has the senator from Rome, about surprise billing. And everybody in this room knows what surprise billing is. So does it affect me that the Medical Association of Georgia put out this letter? They've put out letters on me before. But it's because I stand up and you stand up for the consumer. And I'm proud to stand with you and to stand collectively. That's a good thing. The other thing they oppose me on, and this is my pet topic, there's over 170,000 nurses in the state of Georgia, 140,000 registered nurses, 32,757 licensed practical nurses, and the nurses that I'm most proud of, the nurses that are handing out those contraceptives in those public health departments. There's 811 RNs in the public health department, 174 LPNs, and most importantly, 133 advanced practice registered nurses that these physicians that put the letter on the desk have held them back because they go to your schools. They go to Augusta, they go to Macon, they go to Mercer, they go to Atlanta, they go to Brenau. I think there's about 13 nursing schools in the state of Georgia. Emory University produces some of the best APRNs, nurse midwives, and they're held back. They're held back by that same group that put that letter on your desk because they don't want to expand their scope of practice. And you talk about access to care, you can talk about access to care all you want. There are nurses out there that will go to work in these rural areas, but guess what? They're held back. They're held back and told not to go there. So we can go down that rabbit hole. We'll go down that rabbit hole, I'm sure, in a few minutes. So I'm going to close out, and I want to tell you there's a few changes. Everybody says they don't like this bill. Some people say they don't like it in the minority party. They don't like this bill. Well, guess what? When this bill came over from the House, guess what? When it came over to the Senate, we're pretty smart cookies over here, aren't we? We refined and we changed the bill, just like we do on multiple bills that come over, and just like the bills that go over, even though sometimes they won't even call our bills up. But we changed the bill. In the Senate Science and Technology, we added definitions and made changes throughout the House-passed version to reflect the detectable human heartbeat standards. The House used the terminology human heartbeat. The committee removed law enforcement agency access because they're going to talk about criminalization, access to health records, and maintains that district attorneys have access to those records. When it came over from the House, it said law enforcement agency. We went back to the existing law and we added just one small term about residing in the county in which it was filed. The committee also added something that I was very proud to change. The word, I believe in the original bill, it talked about child support. I know when I adopted the second child that there was a lot of medical expenses. It wasn't the shelter over the head or the food that you eat. What it was you had to buy perhaps new clothing, your feet may swell, you had to buy new shoes, and that's the whole purpose of that. So with that, I think there was a couple of other minute changes, but with that, Mr. President, if I can just get a Kleenex and clean my glasses just a little bit so I can see better, I'll answer questions.
Senator, you have no questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I'm sure there's going to be more debate, and I'll be glad to close out the bill, and I appreciate y'all's attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 55th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I come to speak to you today to voice my opposition to House Bill HB 481. I know many of you know me. You know me as a Democrat. You know I am the chairwoman of the Senate Democratic Caucus. You know me as a senator from DeKalb County. Some of you may even know me from when I worked in Washington, D.C. You might not know me as a woman, so let me just elaborate. I am the third child of 6. I was born in 1941 in Daytona Beach, Florida. My father was in the dry cleaning business, which meant in those days he was a businessman. We were considered a middle-class family to the larger community. In the black community, we were viewed as being rich. My parents were able to provide everything we needed, even if we didn't have everything we wanted. I had a loving family, even if my parents were at times strict, especially on me. As a girl growing up in the 1940s and 50s, I learned about sex from my peers, from my friends talking about what we heard or what we read about. There was no sex talk in my family. Certainly, my mother told me a few things, like keep your dress down and keep your legs closed. But the information didn't go much farther than that. People didn't openly talk about sexuality, not even within the family. It was totally taboo. When I was in high school, a young friend and classmate found herself in a scary position. She was pregnant, and she was desperate. With few options available, she took matters into her own hands. My friend lived in the projects and met her fate with a hanger. Both she and her baby died. When they found her, the baby lay dead inside of her. By 1973, having been married twice, I was 35 years old, married with 2 children of my own. I thought my family was complete, but there weren't many options for birth control available. A decade earlier, in 1965, married couples were given the right to use birth control. In a court ruling, it was protected in the U.S. Constitution. In 1968, intrauterine devices, better known as IUDs, had come on the market. So in 1973, I opted for the Dalcon Shield. Some of you may remember that a physician would only agree to provide an IUD to a married woman who had already completed her childbearing. A year later, in 1974, the FDA suspended sales of the Dalcon Shield due to infections and 7 documented deaths among users. These were women who weren't seeking abortions, but already had children and believed that they had completed their childbearing years. I suppose I was one of the lucky ones. The Dalcon Shield required only my complete hysterectomy. I am happy and grateful to be standing before you today. Still, today, I wanted then and I want now to control my health decisions and have every option available to me and other women. Throughout my life, I have witnessed and experienced a great deal of what women must deal with to take care of their families and their own health. Decade after decade, I've been witness to the healthcare needs of women being shuffled off to the side, ignored, and denied. Court case after court case we've endured. In 1973, 46 years ago, a woman's right to choose was enshrined into law. And since then, we've seen the chipping away at our constitutional rights over and over of our own bodies. And now, here we go again, telling women what to do with their bodies. I don't remember how many times I've come to this well since I've been elected and advocated for choice. Make no mistake, we know you. People who on one day will come to this chamber and propose laws to cut funding for medical care of mothers and babies, and come in the next day to pass a law in the name of life. That doesn't serve to do anything more but make it harder for our most vulnerable people to receive the health care they need. Over the course of history, thousands of women have died through complications of childbirth, trying not to become pregnant or having become pregnant. Your laws of trying to prevent abortions doesn't prevent them. Your laws send women underground into back alley clinics or underground pill markets. Your laws prevent good research and good outcomes. Your laws create fear and danger, and for some, death. The Democratic women of this Senate body are saying enough. We have a right to determine whether or not we give birth. It is enshrined in our Constitution and has been defended by the courts over and over and over again. What we are doing here, what are we doing here? We're putting on a show. The kids on the street would say it's a trick. Today you are trying to pass a law that says we in Georgia care about life, when in fact this legislation will reduce pregnant women's access to doctors. It will increase our already unconscionable infant and maternity mortality rates. But we will not leave this chamber today without hearing from us, who have lived this experience. We know about life. We know what planned childbirth is like, and we know our bodies. We know what it's like when abortion was illegal, and we are determined we are not going back. Mr. President and members of this body, I appreciate your listening to me today, and at this time I'll yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 13th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. The debate around abortion is not new. Until the early 1800s, abortion was legal through common law before they called it quickening, the baby's first detectable motion in the womb. Quickening was a term also used by Aristotle. He apparently studied the issue of abortion and even aborted babies in his day, and he drew conclusions about the beginning of life. He concluded that abortion should not be allowed after quickening. Aristotle didn't have the technology we have today. You look at a 4D image of a child in the womb and tell me that baby isn't alive. I've said for years that the pro-life proponents will win this debate because technology removes all doubt that life begins at conception. However, the pro-abortion proponents say that the rights and the wishes of the mother outweigh the rights of the unborn child. It appears that an unborn child has no rights until a certain stage of life, as some are even debating whether a child that survives abortion can be attended to by a physician or just left to die. Last month, I invited this body, both members of the Democrats and the Republican Party, to preview a film that debuts next week in theaters all over the country. The movie's called Unplanned. The movie brought home to me how real this issue is. All my life, I've known abortions were performed, but I never observed one or knew the details. In fact, I didn't really want to know the details. Last month, I saw an abortion performed in the film Unplanned, and I just can't get those images out of my mind. In the movie, Abby Johnson had 2 abortions herself and was one of the youngest Planned Parenthood clinic directors in the country. The clinic she ran performed 22,000 abortions. What changed her mind was when she was called in to assist in an abortion in the clinic, and Abby observed the baby trying to escape the catheter that was sucking the baby out of the womb. If you've never seen an abortion performed, I challenge you, go see this film and see if it doesn't have an effect on you. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of standing before this body and proclaiming God's word as pastor of the day. I shared the story of Samson, and in Judges 13:3 is the foretelling of his birth to his parents. The Bible says that he would be a Nazirite and would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. The Bible foretells of the births of Jesus, John the Baptist, Samson, Ishmael, and others. Psalms 139:13 says, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." Isaiah 44:2 says, "He who made you, who formed you in the womb." And Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." There are many scriptures that make it very clear to me. God knew us and had a plan for us when we were still in our mother's womb. The word abortion is not going to be found in the Bible. But children were sacrificed for selfish purposes throughout the Bible. Many of the abortions done today are done so as a form of birth control and convenience. Norma Nelson was a woman who had an awakening of her own. She was born in 1947 and just died a couple of years ago in 2017. So she saw a lot of changes to the abortion law throughout her lifetime. At the age of 10, she was sent to a state-run institution in Texas because of her delinquent behavior. And she remained in and out of institutions until she was 15 years old. She recalled her time in the institution as the happiest time of her childhood. She said she was raped by a family member when she was still just a teenager, and when she told her mother about the incident, her mother didn't believe her. At the age of 16, she married Woody McCorvey. She later left him as a result of abuse and moved in with her mother and gave birth to her first child, Melissa, in 1965. McCorvey developed a severe drinking problem after Melissa's birth. McCorvey's mother also had a drinking problem for years, but Melissa apparently changed McCorvey's mother's life as she eventually took custody of Melissa and kept her from Norma. In 1966, McCorvey gave birth to her second child that was given up for adoption. In 1969, McCorvey became pregnant again and returned to Dallas, and she was advised to falsely accuse that she had been raped, someone of rape, so that she could obtain a legal abortion, because under Texas law, that was the only way she could obtain one at the time. She was not successful in obtaining an abortion, and the baby was also given up for adoption. McCorvey never attended a single trial, but was the subject of the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling. She identified to the press as Jane Roe, and that's where the case name came from. McCorvey identified as a lesbian and lived out a quiet life with her partner for many years in Dallas, Texas. In 1994, she became a Christian and voiced her remorse for her part in the Supreme Court decision. In 1995, she stopped working for an abortion clinic and started working for a pro-life group called Operation Rescue. In her second book, One by Love, published in 1998, she made the following comments. She said she was sitting in Operation Rescue's office when I noticed a fetal development poster. The progression was so obvious. The eyes were so sweet. It hurt my heart just looking at them. I ran outside, and finally it dawned on me. Norma, I said to myself, they're right. I had worked with pregnant women for years. I had been through 3 pregnancies and deliveries myself, and I should have known. Yet something in that poster made me lose my breath. I kept seeing the picture of the tiny 10-week-old embryo, and I said to myself, that's a baby. It is as if the blinders just fell off my eyes and I suddenly understood the truth. That's a baby. I felt crushed under the truth of the realization that I had to face up to the awful reality. Abortion wasn't about products of conception. It wasn't about missed periods. It wasn't about children. It was about children being killed in their mother's wombs. All those years I was wrong. Signing the affidavit, I was wrong. Working in abortion clinics, I was wrong. No more for the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester stuff. Abortion at any point was wrong, and it was clear, painfully clear. You know, some of you who will vote against this bill today would support fines of $100,000 plus prison time for disturbing sea turtle eggs, and $250,000 fines for disturbing eagle eggs and jail time. Yet, according to the Georgia Department of Public Health, between 2013 and 2017, there were an average of 27,455 babies aborted in this state each and every year. Around 40% of those abortions each year were aborted by a woman who had had a previous abortion. Abortion is not a form of birth control. Life begins at conception. The scientific evidence is clear. I urge your support of the bill. It's the right thing to do. Mr. President, I would love to yield for questions, but I know your board's lit up and others want to come speak to this bill. But I urge you to vote in support of this bill. Thank you. I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair would like to recognize the senator from the 39th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today because I believe that stories matter and should be included in the public record. I rise because as the mother of a beautiful baby boy, my Carter Cakes, I believe that every woman should have the choice to decide when it is time for them to give birth. I rise today on behalf of myself, a woman of childbearing age, knowing that it is not up to any of you if my husband Leslie and I decide to expand our family. I rise for my late mother-in-law, who told me about her friend when I first told her that I was working at Planned Parenthood. She told me of her friend that died in the late 60s trying to self-abort because she was born during a time when her choice was denied, just as you're trying to do with HB 481. I rise for my friends who've had complications late in their pregnancy and wouldn't have any choices under HB 481. Today, I stand here as one, but on behalf of the thousands of women who need their voices and experiences shared in this body today. I was married. My husband is a physician. We had a reasonably comfortable lifestyle. We had just had our second child together, and I was diagnosed with a pelvic floor prolapse. The labor and delivery of my son was very stressful, and I had a precipitous delivery, which essentially meant that my body did not have the proper time to labor, soften the ligaments so that delivery would be easier. I experienced a significant birth trauma, and the thought of having a child again was something I just couldn't do. I'd gone back to my OBGYN at 12 weeks postpartum to have an IUD. At that examination, it was determined that I was pregnant again. I was breastfeeding regularly, had not begun to menstruate again, and we thought that we were practicing family planning. My husband was planning to have a vasectomy, and I decided to be proactive and get the IUD because we were certain we didn't want to risk another pregnancy. When my doctor told me that I was indeed pregnant again, I was in shock. It was an early pregnancy. I had absolutely no symptoms and assumed that breastfeeding had offered some contraceptive protection, as this is often the talk of women as a part of natural family planning. I was sitting confused, scared, and dealing with the trauma of a previous birth that had just happened less than 3 months prior, and the early onset of postpartum depression. In addition to my infant son, I also had a 2-year-old toddler and a 14-year-old. My husband and I, with the consultation of our clinician, made the decision to terminate the pregnancy. The thought of having to carry another baby, as my body was healing from the traumatic birth of the baby I was holding in my arms, was something I never want any woman to have to face. Many women who have abortions are married. They have the financial means, yet for reasons we can't control, the risk of carrying another child unfortunately mitigates that decision. That is story number 1 from a constituent here in Atlanta. I am 1 in 4 women who had an abortion by the age 45. I was 21 years old, engaged, and in the middle of my 2nd semester of my 3rd year at Mercer University. I didn't realize how common abortion was until I opened up to some friends about mine. 2 of my husband's coworkers in the Air Force shared with him that they'd had an abortion. I found out 4 friends on campus had an abortion while in college. Abortions are going to happen as long as unplanned pregnancies happen. When I interned for Access Reproductive Care Southeast, an abortion fund in Atlanta, I remember one caller sigh in relief after I helped her with some financial assistance for her appointment. She was afraid she would have to throw herself down some stairs. While it sounds crazy, desperation will drive people to great extents. If abortion is outlawed in Georgia, we will see maternal mortality rates increase dramatically, and Georgia already ranks at the bottom of that pile nationally. Please do not put pregnant people's lives in danger for a procedure that is so safe. Please do not punish abortion providers for giving us the medical care we need. Please do not let us become another number for maternal mortality. That is story number 2, a senior at Mercer University. My husband and I were both married previously, and I jokingly say we have his, mine, and the dogs are ours. I was 36 when we married, and we became a beautiful blended family with 3 children between us. His 10-year-old son, his 5-year-old daughter, and my 3-year-old. We loved the idea of having a child together, but being older, we knew it might not happen, So we decided to let fate take its course and be grateful for whatever might come. About a year into our marriage, we found out we were pregnant and were thrilled. Because of our age, we knew it was riskier, so we decided to wait to tell anyone. I'll never forget that 12-week ultrasound. I was so thrilled to see our beautiful child on the screen, and it looked just like my daughter did 5 years before. As we began to think about telling our children, my husband became nervous that his kids might not be as excited because they might feel like this child would somehow replace them. They were already understandably jealous that their dad spent more time with my daughter, let's just call her B for this conversation, but this child would be a part of both of us, and we knew they might feel a little threatened by that. At the 12-week ultrasound, there's also a blood test which can identify any genetic abnormalities. It was a long weekend with all 3 kids at our home, so we asked the doctor if we could go ahead and tell the kids before getting the blood test results because we wanted the full 3 days to let them absorb the news while they were with us. The doctor said obviously he couldn't guarantee anything without the blood test, but everything looked good, so it would probably be fine to go ahead and tell them. So we did. B was thrilled at the idea of having a full-time sibling in the house. His kids were more apprehensive, just like we thought they might be. But by the end of the weekend, they seemed okay. B was so sweet. She started kissing my belly and talking to the baby every day. The following Tuesday, I received a call that started one of the most tragic events in my life. The doctor said the blood test showed the baby had trisomy 18. He said we could take some tissue and verify it through DNA testing that would absolutely confirm it, but to prepare myself, because typically the results are the same. I had no idea what trisomy 18 was, so I began my research. I was devastated. It was a genetic disorder that results in either stillbirth or the baby cannot survive outside the womb for more than a few hours or a few days at the longest. And if it survives, its organs are often outside its body. There's no quality of life for the very brief period he or she might live. I raced in for the DNA test, and it confirmed our worst nightmare. Our doctor said our options were to terminate or to continue the pregnancy and prepare ourselves to bury our child. I asked if we could have some time to think about it, and I remember he said we could take some time, but not too much time, because the law becomes more complicated the further along I became in my pregnancy. I went home and continued to scour the internet for the one doctor in some remote country who was going to save my baby, because as a parent, you think there has got to be a solution somewhere. The idea of giving up is just out of the question. But through tears and sleepless nights, I continued reading the medical data and finally had to accept that I just wasn't going to be able to save my baby. All the while, B, my sweet 5-year-old, continued talking to the baby and kissing my belly every night. I read through hundreds of parent stories, some who chose to terminate and others who made the decision to carry the baby and bury it. All were heart-wrenching as I continued to try to figure out how to make this impossible decision. As B was talking to the baby one night, I knew I couldn't make a choice that would hurt her any more than necessary. The longer she talked to the baby in my belly, the more she was falling in love with her little brother or sister, and I couldn't stand the thought of watching her bury him or her. I was gonna put all 5 family members through 4.5 months of this baby growing inside me, knowing the tragic end to the story. So my husband and I ultimately decided to terminate the pregnancy at about 14 weeks. If HB 481 passes, women who find themselves in the same heart-wrenching situation as mine will have to make the right and the best decision for their family. Government should not be involved in a woman's medical decisions about her body or her family. For those who think women make these decisions lightly, you are wrong. It was truly the most difficult decision I've ever made, but I don't regret making the decision to minimize the traumatic suffering for me and my family. Please do not pass HB 481. Trust women to make the decision that is right for them and their families. A resident of Sandy Springs, Georgia. Living in Middle Georgia, my access to reproductive health care shrunk so much that I couldn't even find an OBGYN that accepted Medicaid. When I tried to get an IUD, The procedure was too painful to go through, so the next options I had for contraception were implant or shots. Nexplanon and Depo shots weren't available at my gynecologist's office, and it was this lack of reproductive care that led to my unexpected pregnancy. I didn't know I was pregnant until about 6.5 weeks, and I had to wait to schedule an appointment for a 3-day weekend when school was out. Implementing a 6-week abortion ban would effectively ban abortion across the board, since most people don't even know that they're pregnant by that time. People already have mandatory 24-hour waiting periods and have to reschedule work, school, and their lives overall to seek care. Adding additional restrictions places unnecessary burdens on Georgia women, a constituent of Senate District 18. I grew up sheltered, the only child of an older couple in the Atlanta area, and decided academic expectations by getting accepted and matriculating at a prestigious university in the Boston area. When I was only 18 and on Christmas break, working a temporary job back in Atlanta, I discovered I was pregnant. I knew that if I followed through, that would be an end to my aspirations for a better life and for providing for any future family. I knew plenty of young women I'd been in high school with who had to drop out, had minimum wage jobs, no prospects, no future, and more importantly, no future for their offspring. And before you try to minimize my situation or shame me into silence, understand that I had used birth control available to me. The young man in question did not use any birth control available to him. I kept myself together, just barely, and returned to campus. Mercifully, Massachusetts has long understood that all humans, female as well as male, are deserving of body sovereignty. The concept, really not difficult to grasp, that each actual human being who has achieved majority is capable and blessed with ownership and stewardship over all of their body parts. A female friend of mine who would never terminate her own pregnancy, nevertheless recognized my need and desire to, and honored my ability and right to self-determination and went with me to an abortion clinic. Since it was legal, the clinic was clean, the staff compassionate, and I recuperated quickly. I finished my undergraduate work, moved back to Atlanta, worked, volunteered with disadvantaged children, homeless, and more, attended graduate school, gave birth to 2 children who are truly spectacular, provided for them in a way that would have been completely, abjectly impossible had I given birth at the tender age of 18. My 2 children, now practically grown, are poised to exert a positive influence on others and help save the planet. Was my decision to terminate easy to make? Of course not. I cried, was panicked, definitely afraid that my parents would disown me and kick me out of the family for having the temerity to be a sexual being. Did I enjoy being in a position to make a difficult decision? Of course not. Was the procedure easy? No, it wasn't. Even though the clinic was clean, the staff compassionate, the pain was there, though transient. I'm still happy I made the decision. Was I entitled to it? Yes, I was. I'm an entire human, not a baby-making machine, merely a womb for the convenience of the other half of the species. All women should have body sovereignty, just as white men have had since before the founding of this country. Besides, look at the statistics. Numbers don't lie. Unlike hypocritical humans, countries that have access to sex education, birth control, and pregnancy termination have a much, much lower incidence of abortion. If you truly care about babies, children, and adults, and aren't just pandering, trying to regulate and shame women for controlling their sexuality, you will trust us with our bodies. That is story number 5 from a Brookhaven resident. While this bill will no longer affect me, it will affect all young women and should not be approved. My sons are 9 years old and 9 months apart in age. This is not a gap we had planned, but our youngest son is also not an accident. He was many years in the making. I had 3 first trimester miscarriages, and under this bill, I would more than likely be criminally investigated for those. We thought 3 miscarriages was horrible. We had no idea what horrible truly was. I made it to 16 weeks with my 5th pregnancy, and naively took our 5-year-old with me to a routine ultrasound. We wanted him to see the heartbeat of his future sibling. My dreams were shattered with the words, "There's a major problem." In the next few days, my husband and I saw multiple maternal fetal specialists and a geneticist. Our son had multiple neural tube defects that were incompatible with life. He had a heartbeat, but would never draw a breath outside of my body. We had options, and those were explained many times. I could continue the pregnancy, but our child was dying. We chose to end the pregnancy, and yes, this was a decision that my husband and I made together after many days of crying and praying. There was no ripping of limbs. There was a labor and a delivery, and we held our son. This was not the end of our nightmare. 1 year later, I was pregnant again. And once again, this time, at 19 weeks, the neural tube defect anencephaly was found. Our daughter had no brain or skull, but she did have a heartbeat. Once again, we had options: plan a funeral or end the pregnancy. We chose to end it at 19 weeks, 6 days. Yes, we held her and unwrapped her blanket, removed her head covering. I will tell you, that is an image that will remain with us for the rest of our lives. It's not an easy thing to end in pregnancy, much less two. We were married, working, responsible parents, not what you think of in terms of people receiving abortions. This is a decision that should be between a woman, partner, and medical staff. Politicians have no place in a medical decision. The people who support this bill don't trust women enough to make their own informed medical choices. We never want it perfect, but we did want viable. Our long journey ended on September 25th, 1994, with the birth of our son. I urge those of you that support this bill to meet with families that have walked this journey and listen to them with an open heart and mind. That is from a constituent in Athens, Georgia. And my final story. I've been on medication for a few years now that it is critical to my daily activity. It makes getting up in the morning possible. It helps me to maintain a meaningful career and enables me to live my life more fully in spite of my clinical depression. It's also US FDA Pregnancy Category C, which means that while they don't have enough human research yet, animal studies have shown that exposure can cause adverse reactions in fetuses. So when my husband and I are ready to start our family, part of our family planning journey, like many women, will be taking the time to transition off of my medication, just like I'll do with my birth control, with the occasional glass of wine, with certain face creams and manicure procedures. No big deal, right? Totally normal. Well, it's a really big deal if we conceived inadvertently before the transitioning off the medication occurred. Because in spite of its critical role in my day-to-day experience as one of the millions of American women living with diagnosed depression, it's potentially lethal to abruptly discontinue. HB 481 would make it so that in the event of our contraception failing, resulting in an unplanned but very wanted pregnancy, we would have to subject our baby to any and all of the possible side effects, many of which are not totally understood yet, or risk maternal mortality by discontinuing the medication to preserve the pregnancy. Abortion isn't the weapon of a single woman. It is a critical medical intervention for married and unmarried women alike, and more often than I think men realize, it's the question of life or death for both parties. An abortion is a medical procedure that ends a pregnancy. It is a healthcare need for millions of women and girls who become pregnant. An estimated 1 in 4 pregnancies end in abortion each year. 1 in 4. That's someone you know. It's not just Democrats. It's not just people that live in Atlanta. Those are people that all of you know. 1 in 4 women by the age of 45 will have had an abortion. As you can tell from the stories that I've shared, no 2 pregnancies are the same. We shouldn't put ourselves in the middle of the doctor-patient relationship, and we should oppose HB 481. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 9th to speak to the bill.
O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in before and behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. A reading from the 139th Psalm, verses 1 through 16. Mr. President, colleagues, I think everyone in this body knows that I'm not one who likes to take myself too seriously. Even though we have serious work to do, we can do it in a way that builds up each other and edifies those that we disagree with. I like to laugh, but today's subject isn't funny. It isn't lighthearted. As a matter of fact, it's probably the heaviest subject we'll take up, the heaviest subject we'll probably ever deal with in our lives. Life versus death, potential versus potential extinguished. I've heard from many people on both sides on this issue. I've heard many new words that haven't been mentioned in this arena, or at least that I've heard before now. Reproductive freedom, maternal health care, most intimate decisions. These are shiny words. They're focus group tested words. They're powerful words, and they're chosen intentionally because they are convincing words. More on this later. When my wife and I decided to make an intimate decision of starting a family, I never knew the difference it would make in my life. It opens you up to more love and the possibility of more pain than you can ever imagine. We made this decision within the context of our marriage and with the careful intent to create a loving home in a dedicated, loving relationship. In this decision, God carefully knit a new life, a combination of two coming together to create one new life. The two shall become one. In our children, the two of us, my wife and I, in our marriage, the two of us, my wife and I, are one. It is a completely representative of the marriage covenant and probably the most perfect institution created by God. I am not foolish. I know there are choices made every day in a passionate moment that create fear that can only be known by the one feeling it. I understand that when carried alone, this intended blessing can become crisis. I know that I will never personally know what it feels like to carry this burden. We must always be mindful to provide care and counsel to those women who are in crisis. It is a broken world in which we live, and there are some tough and heartbreaking situations that require decisions nobody ever wants to make, and we weren't intended to make. But it is the opposite of justice and compassion to create a false framework for such a decision, where the good of only one person is considered, while the very existence of the other is denied. Science and biology, through things like DNA and heartbeats and brain waves and pain response, tell us that there are two unique human beings involved. And yes, the fate of billions of people from all backgrounds point to the full dignity of the person in the womb. Arguments about the rights and freedoms of women are compelling, and they're not without merit. But they are incomplete and result in injustice and the oppression of the weakest people when the full humanity of the baby is ignored or denied. When this debate began, I wasn't 100% where I would fall, because there was a lot of chatter about the problems of this legislation. And I'm so thankful to the Senator of the 45th and her work along with her committee mates to make changes to this legislation that made it better. She is a stalwart in the fight for life. She has spent her career caring both literally through her work as a nurse and figuratively through her work in public service, caring for those in need, caring for those who are incapable of caring for themselves. I hope when my time of public service is over that people will say the same for me. Thank you. People in the halls will tell you that I have engaged with them on this issue. I've asked questions, and I've listened. I've listened to their concerns on the bill. I'll admit that from phone calls, emails, and personal conversations that I've had, it is interesting to hear the identical words and phrases being repeated by almost every caller. There is a carefully planned opposition to this bill. As I told you earlier, I wasn't 100% on this bill initially. But in one of the many conversations I had, I was speaking to a group, and after engaging and listening, they seemingly ran out of tested phrases and arguments. And one person added, "Senator, if we pass this legislation," and I'm quoting, "if we pass this legislation, imagine how many more poor people we would have, and how many more people we would have on welfare and on Medicaid." Let it sink in. Folks, that's a bone-chilling comment. I didn't fully catch the enormity of that statement right away. As I sat the next morning drinking coffee and thought and prayer, I couldn't help but hear it repeat in my mind as if I was still standing out on those ropes. This is the battle we fight. Our choice is life or the extermination of the limitless potential that life represents. This isn't something that I take lightly. I choose to stand and fight for the lives of those who can't fight for themselves, so that they may see the wonders of this world and partake in the liberty that our nation provides. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 22nd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll be brief as we have many speakers to go. I rise in opposition to this bill because first I support a woman's right to choose. And today, one of the things I hope not to do is get into an esoteric discussion about right to privacy or Justice Douglas and the 4th and the 9th and 14th and the 9th Amendment and things of that nature. Because in reality, this bill has pretty much ended that conversation. It hasn't been stated, but in reality, what this bill has done is eliminated the right to choose for women. We say that it's there up to 6 weeks, but as we recognize that, and certainly those more qualified than me, as I can't have children, a person may not even know they're pregnant up to that time period. So what this body has done or may do or has started to do is basically overturn Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And that's not just myself saying that, because the fact of the matter is the author of this bill stated in hearings that if we determine personhood different outside of Roe versus Wade, the viability standard, then the whole context of Roe and Casey falls. And today we have determined, or this bill attempts to determine, what personhood is. But we're no closer to being able to determine what personhood is today than we were when Roe was decided. Quite frankly, if you can find any theologian, you can find any medical person, you can find any philosopher that can define personhood in any way that you want it to be found. It's no different than when the court in Roe said, we as jurists are not in a position to determine personhood. If the medical and philosophers and theologians cannot decide, we certainly can't do it either. And they created the standard that they created. But for some magical way, HB 481 has decided that it now has the answer. And that's fine. It now knows personhood, basically. And it appears to be unambiguous, unwavering. Somebody said courageous, possibly. And it appears that there's nothing political about it at all. This definition of fetal heartbeat, that you can not have an abortion up to fetal heartbeat, which could be up to maybe 6 weeks. It seems that this is very unwavering. But when you really look at this bill, there's one little part in it that tells you this is totally political. And at first blush, it seems like it's done. It's a good thing, but you have to understand what's behind it. It's politics, and it is a recognition. It's both. It's politics and a recognition that at the end of the day, the right to choose is exactly what it is. It's a constitutional right, and it is a right that a woman should have. And you say, what could possibly mean? How could you possibly say that? This bill is very clear. It talks about, it has language in there from the Declaration of Independence. It talks about fetal heartbeat, and basically it's trying to define personhood, and that can be up to 6 weeks. It basically takes away the right to choose. It seems so clear that this is obvious, that this is just unwavering. There's nothing political about this at all. There is no way you can say that there's a recognition that a woman actually has a right to choose within this bill. But I would say, no, that's not accurate. There's an exception that I agree with, but it shows the total contradiction of this whole bill. The exception of non-consensual sex and incest. It shows the complete contradiction of this whole bill. You cannot, if you believe in this personhood that has been advertised, you cannot do that. So the belief is not a true belief. It is a political belief. Because at the end of the day, no man is going to tell a woman who is a victim of non-consensual sex, rape, or incest that you must have that child. But what is beneath that is a recognition, it has to be, that there is a right to choose. That's what's beneath it. So you, in this bill, you're actually contradicting yourself because you are acknowledging this. Because otherwise you couldn't do it. Otherwise you could not do it. And it goes up to 20 weeks, which is interesting because that means there is no right in Georgia to have this procedure, to have this choice, other than those two exceptions. And this is important because when this goes to court, the court is going to ask, well, you're saying there's no right. What is your rational basis for it? Let me give you some language that doesn't come from Senator Harold Jones. This, you guys, those who support this have heard this. This I know is political. Because those who support this have heard this and have told the people who have said these statements, we can't do this. Because you can't expect me at a neighborhood association meeting to tell a woman who stands up and says, I'm a victim of rape, I'll just say it, rape, and you're telling me that I can't have abortion, and that man's gonna say, yep, you can't do it. And you have told many of the people who are supporting this, I can't do it. That's a political decision, and it's wrong. If you really truly believe it. I contend that the true belief is you know that this is a constitutional right, but you've gone so far down this rabbit hole you can't get out of it. Because some of the commentators, conservative commentators, have stated, Let's not punish the wrong person by inflicting upon the innocent child our rage against the rapist. Y'all have heard that, but you've ignored it because you know that you can't tell politically a woman that. And you've told those conservative commentators, I can't do this. Oh yeah. Both are done at the expense, meaning the act, the criminal act, and the medical. Both are done at the expense of an innocent person. And they've told you, if you truly believe this personhood thing that you're advertising, you can't do these exceptions. In fact, it's gotten so deep in y'all circles that there's now the creation of the National Personhood Alliance, which is now separated from other anti-choice groups because they say, well, look, there has to be at least a choice for rape and incest. You choosing to put that language in there shows the inherent contradiction. Shows, number one, it's political, because you have no problem saying to some extent to a poor woman who hasn't been a victim of that, the end result is the end result. Your conservative commentators have told y'all that. The end result is the end result. But if it's a poor woman who can't afford it, she says, no, it wasn't. It was not non-consensual sex. It wasn't incest, but this is where I am in life. I'm in a community college. I got a GED, and I had unprotected sex. I'm sorry. This is where I am. This is going to hurt me. Can I please be part of this exception? And our bill says you can't. And the court is going to say, what's your basis for that? The end result is the end result. How do you make this determination that one person can have access to this exception and another cannot? Because your own conservative commentators have said that the trauma on the lady is the same. So don't come up here and talk about that. Y'all know that's not true. Conservative commentators have said there's no difference in the trauma of the woman who does it out of economic concerns and the woman who does it for non-consensual sex or incest. And the court is going to hear this and look at this record and say, what was your answer to that? Because if you're given an exception here, why are you not given an exception? What's your rational basis of not doing that? We just didn't want to do it. This law is so blatantly, we all know it's blatantly unconstitutional, but that in itself just makes it that much more problematic. So as I looked at this, I recognized that in reality, we recognize that this is a constitutional right. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making these political, even legal exceptions. But I think some people have gone so far down this political rabbit hole, anti-choice, anti-women, you can't get out of it. And I would say this to those of you who believe thoroughly in the right, who have gone down this rabbit hole, you know what's coming next. You know that these groups are not stopping here, and they're going to demand that you take these exceptions out. And you know it's not right. Not only from a political, but from a legal and a moral standpoint, you know it's not right. Today is your day to do what's right. Stand up. Stand up. Get out of this rabbit hole that you've gone down and say it's got to stop. If you didn't think it had to stop, you wouldn't have put this exception in there. This isn't to help me. You've ended the right to choice. I believe in the right to choice. You've done nothing for me. You've done nothing for women. You ended choice with this bill. Make no mistake. This was for you. Thank you. I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 3rd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. Our Georgia Constitution begins with a Bill of Rights. And the controlling provision of that Bill of Rights that is key for our debate today states that the protection to person and property is the paramount duty of government. Our state, we first adopted our Bill of Rights in 1861, and ironically, Georgia's Bill of Rights arose out of the Secession Convention. And yet the legislators who adopted our Bill of Rights and the people of this state who ratified it within our 1861 revised Constitution failed to consider that there was an unrecognized class of the human family who could not enjoy the protections of their newly adopted Bill of Rights. Such high and lofty words, whether they appeared in our federal Constitution or in our Georgia Constitution, meant nothing for those under the institution of slavery until after the end of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th and 14th Amendments. Our duty today is to determine if those same words mean anything for another unrecognized class in the human family who still remain at the mercy of those holding power over their lives. Shall we not recognize now that it is every living human being who ought to enjoy the protection of those words? Would anyone be able to say that a child in the womb is not living? Would anyone be able to say that the child in a mother's womb is not a living, distinct human being? Then why would we not want to protect the most fragile and vulnerable and innocent among us? Even those without the medical knowledge that we have today, the Greeks had enough wisdom 23 centuries ago to recognize that it was an offense against humanity to take the life of an unborn child. Now, when we have attained the scientific evidence that their wisdom was correct, why are we so willing to ignore the Hippocratic Oath that has guided Western medical practice and its successes for over 2,000 years? In fact, there was enough evidence in 1859 for the American Medical Association's report on abortion to consider whether the human being in utero is a person. That report called for the protection of the independent and actual existence of the child before birth as a living being. They decried the unnecessary and unjustifiable destruction of the human life, both before and after quickening. Does not the word person in our 14th Amendment and here in our Georgia Constitution refer to a living member of the human family? A human being at any stage of life ought to be recognized as a person. However, at the very least, we need to recognize that when a human heartbeat has begun, that the interest of life must be paramount. In modern medicine, we know that life in the womb begins at conception. We know that the child's life is unique, with his or her own DNA and blood type. Certainly we know, even as a child would know, that life is present at the sound of a heartbeat. In every other context of law, we recognize that a person is alive if they have a beating heart that is beating on its own without artificial life support. And when that heartbeat stops, life is ended. Why wouldn't we recognize that a new person is alive in the womb in the presence of a beating heart? Even when a little child sees a sonogram taken of that developing life in a womb with a beating heart, they recognize that it is a baby, a little person with a life of its own. And studies have shown that once a heartbeat begins, that the developing child has a 95% chance of being carried successfully to term. The federal Constitution establishes the minimal threshold for our rights and liberties, but it states we are free to offer more protections to persons within our jurisdictions. For example, under the Kelo versus City of New London case, the federal government allowed private property to be taken for redevelopment. However, in Georgia in 2006, we prohibited that practice and offered our property owners more protection for their property. That is essentially what this bill does, but on a matter of greater importance. We do this by weighing the life interest of the child and recognizing the personhood of that child at the point of its heartbeat. The personhood status is further established by recognition that tax benefits, medical expense claims, tort rights, and inclusion in the census accrue at that point of the heartbeat. Now, we have plenty of scientific evidence to guide our discussion today, and it's not my purpose to go over the scientific facts as much as it is to say that as our society gains scientific knowledge and is more enlightened over time, the appropriate recognition of that knowledge must be reflected within our legal system. As the U.S. Supreme Court stated in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, in constitutional adjudication as elsewhere in life, changed circumstances impose new obligations, and the thoughtful part of the nation could accept each decision to overrule a prior case as a response to the court's constitutional duty. Due to today's strong scientific evidence and the fact that the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology in its 2015 guidelines provided that the standard for viable intrauterine gestation is the presence of a heartbeat, we're on solid scientific ground to legally recognize that person in the womb and provide legal benefits and protections to that new person. Thus, the life interest of the child is truly established at that point in time. As we balance the liberty interest of the mother and the life interest of the child should prevail in the presence of a heartbeat. Do not our evolving standards of decency demand that we look at this evidence again today? Should we not rely upon the growing enlightenment received from our expanding scientific knowledge? Over and over in our law, we revisit the code and we update it. Our courts overturn decisions that were wrongfully made. What if our nation had let the Dred Scott decision stand? What if the court had not revisited Plessy versus Ferguson? We know that the nation's policy of segregation festered for far too long. When television revealed the ugliness of segregation in pictures that we could not avoid, the nation had to face and deal with the truth. The policy of segregation was wrong, and it denied an entire class of persons dignity and the protection of the laws to which they were entitled. The decision of Roe v. Wade has been festering far too long in this country. We're beginning to see the ugliness of abortion and what it does to the unborn. Images are now available which reveal the barbaric practice of tearing apart a living person in the womb, a person with a heartbeat. As a country, we've seen the product of abortion, little pieces of body parts stacked on cold, sterile trays, too gruesome to show here today. I have pictures, but I can't show them on the screen because it's not proper to do that in polite society. But if anyone wants to see the truth, I have a box with those pictures in there on my desk. If you want to see the truth about abortion, you can come by and pick up a set of pictures. I have one for everyone in this body. For far too long, we've refused to see. We've looked at the other way, and we've denied the most vulnerable class of human beings the protections of the law to which they're entitled. It's time for us to recognize our error as a nation in allowing the millions of children to have been aborted since 1973. The life interest of the child, especially at the point when a heartbeat begins, is paramount. It's time that we recognize the personhood of the unborn, because we know when an unborn child is allowed to survive to term, that child has the opportunity to become maybe a great scientist, teacher, musician, doctor, nurse, electrician, artists, firefighters, policemen, inventors, and maybe even a legislator. We have a legislator here with us today whose mother decided to give him up for adoption out of necessity. He's the author of this bill. We're glad that he's with us. I urge you to stand firm for those who cannot speak yet with our voices in this battle, but their bodies bear the witness to the truths. Our state has the freedom to choose a policy that favors life. So let's do that. Let's do what is right. Let's pass this bill. I yield the well, Mr. President.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 48th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak against House Bill 481. For every Georgian, for the thousands who've reached out to me, men and women, and for those who have no voice. For I, too, was a person with no voice until I was able to escape poverty and become a lawyer and become a state senator by the grace of God to stand here with you today. And I too know God. Like all of us, I wear a number of hats, and I'm going to wear a few of them as I speak today. I'm going to start by speaking as an attorney, a former federal prosecutor, and counsel to a former governor of this great state. Ladies and gentlemen, this legislation is blatantly unconstitutional. We should just tear this up, the Constitution. It would be difficult, not to mention extremely expensive and fiscally irresponsible, to defend in court. Now, I could go line by line through the entire history of this issue, but I'm not going to. I'm going to give you a brief overview. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution holds that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Due Process Clause is not restricted to nor found in other guarantees enumerated in the Constitution. Rather, it is a rational continuum which protects against arbitrary and unnecessary restraints or burdens placed upon the individual, here women, by the government. The constitutional protection of a woman's choice with her family and her doctor and her God, or whatever the family believes in as a greater power or not, about the pregnancy originates from the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. In the 1992 case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the Supreme Court of the United States affirmed the 1973 ruling in Roe versus Wade, the constitutional right to have an abortion. The Casey court adopted what is called the undue burden standard. That if the primary purpose of a state's legislative or regulatory scheme is to place a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion before the fetus attains viability, an undue burden on a woman's right to decide to have an abortion exists, and the provision of law is constitutionally invalid. That means unconstitutional. While the state has a legitimate interest in promoting life or some other rational goal, a statute is nevertheless unconstitutional if the effect of the statute or regulation creates an obstacle to a woman's free choice. The court in Casey held that unnecessary health regulations that have the purpose or effect of presenting a substantial obstacle to a woman seeking an abortion imposes an undue burden on the constitutional right. And you can check those quotes. 20 years later, in 2016, Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstadt, the United States Supreme Court was presented with the issue of whether two provisions of Texas law, HB 2, the first provision being the so-called admitting privileges requirement, and the second provision regarding necessary clinic upgrades to meet surgical center requirements, violated a woman's right to choose. The court applied the undue burden standard test utilized in Casey to that law and determined the two provisions were in violation of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. By finding the law in violation of the Constitution, the Supreme Court of the United States furthered the notion that the Constitution protects a woman's right to choose abortion, and courts have an obligation to carefully review state regulation of abortion to ensure that it respects the 14th Amendment's guarantee of liberty for all. The court held that the undue burden standard requires the courts to consider the burden the law imposes on abortion access, together with the benefits those laws confer. Therefore, more than just rubber stamping state laws is needed to protect the rights of women. There should be no rubber stamps. Just last year, a district court judge ruled that the 15-week ban in Mississippi was unconstitutional because it unequivocally violated women's constitutional rights. In a statute similar to this one, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down an Arkansas law banning abortions at 12 weeks of pregnancy if a fetal heartbeat is detected. The court ruled, by banning abortions after 12 weeks gestation, the act prohibits women from making the ultimate decision to terminate a pregnancy at any point before viability. North Dakota's abortion ban, which also banned abortion when a fetal heartbeat is detectable, was also struck down as unconstitutional. The district court issued a preliminary injunction in 2013 to block enforcement of that law, and in 2014 struck it down as invalid and unconstitutional measure that cannot withstand constitutional challenge. The following is from the temporary restraining order granted just last week against a Kentucky bill, Senate Bill 9, that would have had more or less the same effect as the legislation before us today. Referring to those who oppose the legislation, the restraining order says that the plaintiffs have shown a strong likelihood of a success on the merits of their 14th Amendment due process challenge to Senate Bill 9. So you can see from the case law, and with laws that are substantially the same as what we are looking at today, that the case for this proposed legislation for Georgia violates the privacy provisions of the 14th Amendment and is weak, if any justification exists at all. For this reason, I call on each of you to vote no on House Bill 481. Now I'm going to speak to you as a state senator. I, like the rest of you, took the oath of office just 2 months ago. When we did, we swore to, quote, support the Constitution of this state and of the United States, and on all questions and measures which may come before us, end quote. This legislation, House Bill 481, would be difficult and expensive to defend. But we shouldn't even be defending or passing it in the first place, when doing so is in direct contravention of our duty, our sworn duty. Furthermore, we're also neglecting our unstated obligation to perform due diligence by ignoring the recommendations of such expert groups as the Medical Association of Georgia, which has submitted a letter here, the Georgia Academy of Family Physicians, the Midwives of Georgia, the National Association of Social Workers, Georgia Medical Students, the Georgia OBGYN Society, and a petition from the 7th Congressional District, which was delivered to us. Those are just to name a few, but these are on your desk. We also have failed yet again to obtain a fiscal note. We have failed to obtain a fiscal note and to understand the financial impact of this legislation, which significantly expands the definition of a, quote, dependent, and could cost and will cost, if passed, this state millions of dollars. Testimony before the committee by the author of the bill was $10 to $20 million, but that's just a guess. That's on top of the legal fees Georgia taxpayers will have to pay to defend this statute in court. And let's talk about those attorney fees for a second. Based on what we know about other states' experiences in defending blatantly unconstitutional laws such as this, Georgia taxpayers will be paying millions of dollars to defend this law, a defense that they have not asked for. They have not voted for us to do this. And in fact, a majority of Georgians do not support this bill. This recent Supreme Court case regarding abortion cost the state of Louisiana approximately $4.7 million. Indiana spent $2.8 million, and Texas has spent more than $4.5 million defending laws, and Arizona about $2.2 million. Even Tennessee's Catholic bishops recently concluded that, quote, given the field of legal realities that we must consider, we believe it would not be prudent to support the heartbeat bill, knowing the certainty of the overturning of it when it is challenged, in addition to the court-ordered fees that would be paid. That is a statement from the Knoxville Bishop, Sticka, the Nashville Bishop Spalding, and the Archbishop Kurtz, who is currently overseeing the Memphis Diocese. As you can see from my somewhat short survey of legal fees and the cost of defense, this is not good use of taxpayer dollars. And we are supposed to be stewards of those dollars. And we are failing to do so. And we don't even know how much we're spending. So, to recap, so far I've worn my attorney hat and my senator hat. Now I'm going to put on one more hat, and it's probably not the one you're expecting. Yes, I am a mother, I am a woman, but clearly our points about women deserving equal rights and equal protection under the law have fallen on deaf ears in this body and in the body across the hall. So I'm going to speak as someone who grew up in Northwest Georgia, Walker County, rural Georgia, as a person who moved between trailer parks and a public housing project. My sister, Scarlett McGovern, is here today. Please stand. We grew up there together. On the off chance this legislation is able to make it through the courts, there will still be a small population in this state who cannot obtain safe, legal abortions. The people affluent enough to travel to states where they are legal will be able to get a safe abortion. The only people truly impacted by this legislation are those who come from families like the one I grew up in, that my sister Scarlett grew up in, and where currently there is no OBGYN in Walker County. I looked it up. There are a few words that are thrown around a lot in debates like this: values, moral, immoral, quoting scripture. I want to talk for a second about the word immoral. When I walked in this morning, I was shocked by the number of police cars lined up outside here by the Capitol. As a former federal prosecutor who has prosecuted some of the most egregious crimes, I have never seen such a police presence. And I ask you, if we need this much police presence and law enforcement, we might be doing something wrong. I would say it's pretty clearly immoral if we're going to sit here in this fancy marble building in the middle of a thriving metropolis and ignore the true weight of this legislation and to forget the desperation of those who would be affected by it. People like the family I grew up in, the very people so many of you represent or are supposed to be representing. I ask you to think about that. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thanks, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 14th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of HB 481, more commonly known as the Heartbeat Bill. My support is not because it's politically correct or that science supports that these little ones are life and valuable. My support is rooted in not only my faith, but because this issue is deeply personal. It's deeply personal to me and to many others in our state. And this issue has impacted and affected my life for the last 30 years. You see, it's an issue that people on both sides are deeply passionate about and for several different reasons. We often talk about being a voice for those that have no voice, and I 100% agree. But that statement refers to the unborn. I would ask you, what about the poor girl that's faced the abortion? Have we considered how this decision affects her and the multitudes of others in her life? Each and every one of us have a story, our story. Please allow me to share mine. It involves 4 young women. You see, I was married when I was 23 years old, and I was incredibly excited about starting this new chapter in my life. Like many young couples, we didn't have much money. We had each other and we had a plan. And over the next 4 years, we bought a house, paid off student loans, and then on our 4th year in marriage, we began to try to have a child. We tried for 1.5 years because of infertility, and used drugs and all the other procedures and treatments. It was extremely frustrating and very emotional. For those of you that endured or experienced infertility, you understand. One particular day, I came home from the office to find my wife curled up on the floor in tears. She wasn't just a little upset. She was physically and mentally exhausted from sobbing all day. After nearly 2 hours of consoling her and wondering what in the world would have caused her to be so upset, she revealed a deep, dark secret that she had hidden from me and most of the world for many years. You see, she had terminated a pregnancy years and years ago. And it had haunted her all these years. Now she was convinced that God would not allow her to get pregnant because of her actions. She said at the time, I didn't think I had any other choice. I was young, scared, and alone. We sought out professional counseling to help her grieve and to understand that the God that we believed in was full of grace, mercy, and forgiveness. And I hoped and prayed she could forgive herself as we thought to get back to being Barbie and Ken. But you see, that was not enough. She just couldn't forgive herself. She turned to alcohol and many other vices, and 1.5 years later, our storybook marriage ended in divorce. See, the divorce didn't end there. She continued to spiral down for the next 5 years until she nearly succeeded in ending it all. A few years later, the Lord brought me a sweet girl from Mississippi. Several months later, we were engaged. Becky dealt with endometriosis for most of her life. But it was during our engagement we discovered that she had accelerated endometriosis that had destroyed part of her colon, an ovary, a cecum, and much more. The result was an emergency hysterectomy. Our dreams were crashed. We had hoped to start a family one day, but clearly this development meant we would never have biological children, and the heartbreaking reality set in for both of us. Why, Lord, we asked. 3 years passed, and we decided to adopt, as many of you know. We started the process, and it was extremely difficult and expensive as all get out. After becoming frustrated with the process, we decided to go a private adoption route, began contacting thousands of people, in search of an opportunity. That opportunity came one day when I called a center in Nashville, Tennessee. And that day, a scared 20-year-old girl was sitting with a counselor. You see, she was all alone, scared and feeling inadequate. Sound familiar? She had decided that an abortion was her only option, and with the termination papers and a pen in her hand, she was prepared to end her 5-month pregnancy. But God had a different plan. It was then, at that time, our phone rang into the center. And after much discussion, she realized that she had another option. Today, that young woman lives a happy, fulfilled life in another state. Ladies and gentlemen, there are women all over this state that have made the unfaithful decision to have an abortion. As I stand here before you, many of these young ladies not only regret it, but they take it with them for the rest of their life. Listen to these statistics. Not from me, but a 2011 study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry. The study examined 877,000 women, of which 164,000 had an abortion. The women who had an abortion were 81% more likely to experience mental health struggles, 34% more likely to develop anxiety disorder, 37% more likely to experience depression, 110% more likely to abuse alcohol, 155% more likely to commit suicide, 220% more likely to abuse marijuana and drugs. I realize that the tremendous passion exists on both sides of this issue. And I don't want your personal stories. I don't know your personal stories or how you may have been impacted. But I hope, as challenging as this was to share mine, that you'll consider the decision of terminating a pregnancy is much more than just ending the life of a baby or a child. It impacts that woman for life and the family for generations to come. With that, my friends, I ask that you prayerfully consider supporting this bill. I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 44th to speak to the measure.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise this evening to oppose House Bill 481. Colleagues, I'd just like to talk a little about maternal mortality, the death of a woman caused related to her pregnancy during and approximately a year afterwards. There are disparities in health care. And I'm concerned because we haven't expanded Medicaid. I am concerned about poverty and health care. And it's all about access to health care. Giving birth to a child is supposed to be the happiest time of your life, and many times it ends up being a nightmare, a deadly event. Time and time again, persons tell us about events where the patient was fine and then died. The quality of care is the problem. There is a lack of mental health services, and then you have rural health hospitals have limited store of blood products. Then there's a lack of diligent follow-up for women with complications, and women with chronic health issues. Postmortem. Hemorrhaging is the leading cause of death. It's hard to predict, and still more could have been done during labor. Colleagues, I want you to understand that banning abortions do not eliminate abortions. It just makes it less safe and put more pregnant women at risk. Thousands of women lost their lives to unsafe abortions before Roe versus Wade, and since legalization, it is one of the safest medical practices in the U.S. You know, in the 1960s, rich girls got safe abortions, and then poor girls many times got unsafe abortions with complications from infections, and then some of them just bled out. You know, that's a hard pill for parents to swallow. And this is hard for their friends, those who love those girls so much. It was hard for them to absorb. I digressed a little, but let me just get back to maternal mortality. This is such an important discussion. There have been many studies and reports. One report suggests that women are in poorer health when they get pregnant and are not getting proper care. Dr. Brenda Fitzgerald and an OBGYN wrote that chronic health conditions like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease are more and more common in pregnant women. These conditions make delivery more dangerous. And then a report from the Georgia for Healthy Futures say that more than 70 of the state's 159 counties do not have OBGYNs. Since 1994, 35 labor and delivery units, mainly in rural hospitals, have closed. And then closures have accelerated in recent years, according to the Georgia OBGYN Society. The review indicated that 70 to 80% of women who died have received prenatal care, but then it's still not clear how regular and how extensive that care was. The report says that only 35% began prenatal care in the first trimester. So we do understand that it's about the access to care. And it's not just rural Georgia, it's all over Georgia. Education and prenatal care are both important. Women must know that they can still hemorrhage after leaving the hospital. So you need some health care. You can have a good job with the best insurance, a high-paying job. But then in an instance, if you're laid off or you go on contract work, then you do not have that insurance. And let's think about it. People who do not have insurance put off going to the doctor. They put off getting care. They just don't have it. And so they wait until it's too late. So we want to take care of these people. So a summary of the report that highlights questions raised by maternal outcomes within a global community. The analysis of the U.S. research says that maternal health and death are influenced by socio-economic, cultural, and political environments, which are shaped by policy-led decisions. So in conclusions, we are number 48 in maternal mortality. So we must address this issue about health care and providing quality health care, because the quality of care is the problem. We must be concerned about this access to care. So I'm here today just to say I oppose HB 481 and I advocate for choice, and I suggest and recommend that we give women the right to make decisions about their own bodies and not the men. Mr. President, I yield the well.
The senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 28th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to tell everyone here I am pro-choice. Every woman should have a right to choose their own doctor, to choose their own partner, to choose their own place to live, choose their own job, and there are many others. And a fundamental role of government is to protect these liberties. But another fundamental role of government is to protect the most sacred, unalienable right endowed to each of us, life. And nobody is allowed to choose to kill an innocent human being simply because they are in the way. Abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills innocent human beings. And a society that allows abortion is a society that has adopted the idea that some human beings matter more than others. And that, my friends, is a dangerous idea. We all know that ideas have consequences, especially in this place. But dangerous ideas have victims. And the dangerous idea that some human beings matter more than others is the same one that produced the Holocaust and slavery, both of which we still feel the ill effects of today. So what we decide about abortion in this state and in this nation, it does matter. And future generations will be looking to us with either pride or disgust. Now, almost all the justifications given for abortion assume that the unborn is not a human being like you and like me. And if the unborn were not human, then killing them requires no more justification than getting a haircut or simply getting a tooth pulled. But I'll be the first to admit these justifications are unquestionably important issues. Appeals to privacy, poverty, disability, the child being unwanted, neglected, women being able to pursue their education, their career. Again, very serious and very complex issues, but none of which would justify killing a 2-year-old. No one in their right mind questions the humanity or the value of a toddler. So we want to know is whether the unborn is human like the toddler is human. So let's focus on answering the question, what is the unborn? And let's do that before we begin to talk about killing it. And if we focus on that and that alone, abortion becomes a very simple issue. So what is the unborn? Science has definitively answered that question. Leading embryology books say that from the very beginning, from conception, the unborn is living, it is distinct, and it is whole. It is a whole human being. So how is it living? It fits the definition of an organism that we all learned about in junior high life science class. It grows, meaning it undergoes cellular reproduction. It metabolizes, meaning it turns food into energy, and it responds to stimuli. What makes it distinct? Well, it is a separate entity from its mother with its own unique genetic code that is different from its mother's, and yes, its father's. If it was part of a woman's body and not simply attached to her, a pregnant mother would be said to have 4 arms or 4 legs or 2 heads. And we all know that's crazy. Is it whole? When you scratch your arm, your skin cells, all of which contain your DNA, they fall to your lap or the ground in front of you. Some of those cells are still alive when they land there, and they will die in a couple of minutes. But you have not just committed mass murder. Your skin cells, just like your other cells, are part of you. Their job is to contribute to the overall function of the organism, you. Unlike your skin cell, an embryo is a whole entity in and of itself. Even at the single cell stage, its parts contribute to its overall function, and it goes on to do something remarkable. And this leads to another crucial difference. We tend to think of embryos as things that are constructed, nothing more than a sum of their parts, things that are put together piece by piece. This is why we commonly hear things like, it's just a clump of cells, or it's just a chunk of tissue, as if you could add more parts to it and all of a sudden there's a baby. But the embryo does something that no constructed thing could ever do. The embryo develops itself from within. None of us were constructed. From the point you came into existence as a single-celled human being or a single-celled embryo, you drove your own development to whatever point you are at today. And many of us are still developing. But we aren't just a sum of our parts like a piece of machinery. Human beings are the kinds of things that come into being all at once and then mature accordingly. And when does all of this happen? At conception. Now, the only difference is in you as an adult and you as an embryo is simple. It's four things: your size, your level of development, your environment, and your degree of dependency. So first, let's look at size. Yes, embryos are smaller in size than newborns and adults, but are large people more valuable than small people? Men are generally larger than women, but does that mean that they should deserve more rights? Size is not relevant in this argument. Second is the level of development. Yes, embryos are less developed than newborns. They are less developed than adults. But my 2-year-old daughter is less developed than my 4- and 5-year-old sons. Should my boys have more rights than my daughter? Again, level of development is irrelevant in this argument. Third is the environment. Where you are has no bearing on who you are. And I'm going to say that again. Where you are has no bearing on who you are. Your value as a human did not change when you left your home today. So explain to me how the unborn can simply move a few inches down a birth canal and all of a sudden go from non-human to human. Explain to me, if the unborn is not human, how changing their location all of a sudden makes them valuable. Fourth and final is degree of dependency. If viability makes us human, then newborns who cannot feed themselves or take care of themselves have no right to life. A diabetic requiring insulin has no right to life. And I look around this body, and I look up in the gallery, and I know we're all different. We all think different. But I hope we can all agree on several things. I hope that we can agree we all come in different shapes and sizes. We come from different parts of the globe. We have different degrees of development and different levels of dependency. Yet we are all equal. Yes, we are all equal because we share a common human nature. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes the senator from the 34th to speak to the measure. Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. had to squeeze through the cars this morning that were blocking the street. I didn't know what was going on, if I should come in this building or not. I've been here since the 90s, off and on. I've never seen such a thing. But I committed to the people. I'm not committed to the politics always. It was a tangled maze that was leading in, and I didn't know who, what, when, where, or why. But I came in, and I was praying. I'm a Christian. And I was called out in the hallway on the ropes a little while ago by friends that I've known for years who are strong Christians. We've been in a clergy organization together. I've spoken at some of their churches, and they called me out and truly admonished me because they assumed that I was going to speak against the bill because I have on all white. They were right. I'm asking that you who have decided to vote for it, look at it again even, and make your decision. And I hope that we can vote this bill down. Because, yes, I'm a Catholic, but I'm a Catholic for pro-choice. They reminded me that I shouldn't go against the Catholic hierarchy and the beliefs of many. And I am still personally committed to the instruction book that I've always had, and I call that the Holy Bible. And I was thinking about Ephesians 6 and 12 that says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." I had prayed all morning the Beatitudes, where Jesus said to the disciples, and when he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I thought about the poor who want to do things with their bodies that I might not do to mine. And then I thought about them. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure at heart. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they are called the children of God. And it goes on and on. So I'm using my free will that my Bible teaches me that God gave us, because I have to answer for myself. I can't answer for anyone else, and you can't answer for me when that day comes. So God gave me that free will, and I believe it. You know, my family is very conservative, and they might not even all agree with me, but they didn't even agree that I should come and be a politician. But they trust me, and they truly support me. I believe that God gave us this free will, and it's given to all of us, and we should use it. So I use the right and the privilege to marry before sex or anything to my husband, who's in heaven now. We decided when to have children, and God only blessed us with 2. So one might say that I'm pro-life. Maybe I am if that's my free will, but I'm pro-choice because I think that everyone should have the same right that God gave me and others to decide what they want to do with their bodies. So I trust women. And why trust women? What does it mean to trust women and value individual consciousness? World-renowned experts agree, even Catholics, and many other people of different faiths all over the world, that believe that pro-choice is what God has given us a chance to do. They have to answer to themselves, to maybe their God or their religion, and maybe to their spouse. It was Helen Reddy that said in her song that I am woman, and this is why I trust women. I know who I am. I have 5 sisters and no brothers. I grew up with a strong grandmother, great-grandmother, and my beautiful mother. And I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore. And I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before. And, you know, I've been down there on the floor, and no one's ever gonna keep me down again. You say, yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, I've paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I have to, I can do anything, because I'm strong, I'm invincible, I'm woman. And I feel that other women should be able to do what they need to do. Politico said that Catholics of choice says that Catholic bishops are allowing women to be treated as second-class citizens, especially in facilities supported by public dollars, because they say that we just keep chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at Roe versus Wade. And that's that bill that a lot of people don't want to hear about and say is wrong. But on January the 22nd of 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down its landmark decision in the case of Roe versus Wade, which recognized that the constitutional right to privacy extends to a woman's right to make her own personal medical decisions, including the decision to have the abortion without interference from politicians. The court held that a woman has the right to choose abortion care until fetal visibility. That's God's law I talked about earlier, and that's man's law. Its stages of pregnancy, this particular bill, one reason that I really couldn't support it, it's been debated for so many years. And when does a baby really happen? Is it an embryo? You know, when? Well, first is conception, then it's the first trimester, and that starts at 4 weeks to 14 weeks, not 6 weeks. And then it's the third trimester, the second trimester is 16 weeks to 26 weeks, and the third trimester is 28 weeks to 38 weeks, and then lastly, the baby comes at 40 weeks. But this bill, HB 481, called for 6 weeks, and that's before most women even know that they're truly pregnant. The embryo is about 1/4 inch long, not 14 inches long at that particular time of 6 weeks, 1/4 inch long. The embryo does not have a brain yet. It's beginning to get a head and a torso, but that's all. Some people say it looks like a pea pod. And it's a pumping that begins, but what I learned in biology is that it is a vessel that begins and eventually turns into a heart, maybe at 8 to 12 weeks. It's not a heart yet. So the heart is not beating, in my opinion, from what I learned in school, and I do have a PhD. Thank you very much. You know, I'm truly appalled that I have to stand here today to defend or address this personal issue about what a woman should be doing with her body. I am, like I said earlier, one of 5 daughters. My mother had no boys. And, you know, I want all of my sisters and all of the people that I represent to do what they need. You know, in state legislatures across the nation, from Oregon to Illinois to New York, but not in Georgia, have passed a wave of progressive laws to protect access to abortion and safeguard a woman's autonomy to make her own moral choices over deeply consequential reasons, deeply complex decisions around when and whether to continue a pregnancy. You know, the so-called heartbeat bill that we have now has been passed in some other states, and it's already having trouble. About 90 individuals and organizations testified against this bill in, say, Ohio, for example. It included some national organizations that's standing with us here in Georgia: the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, State Medical Association, Ohio Religious Coalition for Reproductive Rights, the medical professionals in many states, and the group that I'm a part of, Catholics for Choice, and so many different other organizations and doctors and nurses. The president of Catholics for Choice said abortion is a personal choice and not sometimes in which legislatures need to insert themselves. And I quote, "As Catholics, in full accordance with the teaching of our faith, we shape and advance sexual and reproductive ethics that are based on justice, reflect a commitment to women's well-being, and respect and affirm the capacity in women to make moral decisions about their lives." And I know that my husband and I wish we could have had 10 children if God had so blessed us. We only had 2 boys. So we didn't, that was our choice, and that's what we did. So in closing, I just want to say, yes, I am wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. And yes, I've paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I have to, I can face anything. Yes, I am strong. I am invincible. I am woman. I am woman. I am woman. So let us obey God's law and man's law. Let's vote no to HB 481. Mr. President, I yield the will and ask that all of you trust a woman and trust her to do what she can with her free will. I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 54th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Friends, I rise today in support of House Bill 481. Just 2 days following my family's praise to God in the birth of my first grandson. But long before 2 days ago, on April 4th, 1990, nearly 29 years ago, my wife and I entered the hospital in the anticipation of our first child's birth. Not knowing if we would have a boy or a girl, we found ourselves, as all new parents do, just trusting God in all that would come. That day we received our daughter, and we named her Heather. 6 months later, I returned home from working the night shift at the Youth Development Center, known as the Dalton RYDC, as a youth development worker, and I got home about 1 o'clock in the morning. As I walked in, I thought I would look in my daughter, and as I looked in, she was lying there awake, laying on her back, less than 6 months old, and she was looking in one direction, and when I veered over the crib, she turned and looked at me, and then gave me the most precious smile. And I was just overwhelmed because in just a few weeks, she already knew who I was. She already knew who I was. So that night I stayed up, and I just was overwhelmed by the moment. And I stayed up and I wrote this poem for my wife, and it's on each of your desk. The title of this poem is God's Smile. And I wrote this for my wife. The pains had started, but it would be a while yet, as the baby wouldn't arrive until your body was set. We were so nervous and scared of the unknown. I was only 25. We were so nervous and scared of the unknown. I'm glad you were there, but I couldn't have done this alone. As the day went along, the pains would get worse. The nurses had warned that you'd probably curse. It would be a boy, so we believed, but God doesn't show what's up his sleeve. Now the pains are really strong. Oh, dear God, let nothing go wrong. I tried and I tried to ease your pain, but no matter what, they would always remain. A nurse came in. It's time to have this child. They told you to push, and you really went wild. You pushed and you pushed until the head popped out. It was so big, no wonder you shout. Just a few more pushes, we were almost there. This baby sure doesn't have much hair. It's a girl, they shouted as I grinned ear to ear. God was smiling through me at what he'd put here. They handed her to you, you should have seen your face. God was smiling through you too. I'd know that smile any place. Now sometimes we argue and jest, whose feature she has and who she likes the best. She has your nose, she has my eyes, but she has God's smile, and that's no surprise. Unlike those in 1973, medical science has shown the viability of life in the U-Road. We now know so much more than we did when Roe versus Wade passed. Because of advances in medicine and technology, we know that any child with a heartbeat, just as anyone in this room, they possess their own and unique DNA, their own and unique blood type. They have brain functioning and have begun developing motor skills. Most importantly, we know that a child with a heartbeat feels pain, the same as any of us. 2 days ago, my daughter gave birth. 2 days ago, my daughter gave birth to a miracle, just as she was 28 years ago. No one names tissue. No one gives a name to tissue. My grandson's name has been known for many months. We were a nation that was founded on a promise that each and every soul was endowed by our Creator with certain and unalienable rights, which means they cannot be taken away. That we all have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What we need to understand is this is bigger than us. It's bigger than the issue of the last 20, 30, 40 years in this country, the political issue. We're looking at the future of our nation. Because the truth of the matter is, it was a contest to find out, could people live without a king? And what rights do individuals have that they could live without a king above them? To tell them how they could live, to tell them how they should live, to tell them if they could be free. The question we have in front of us is, are we still going to be a free nation? Do we have a right to life? Do we have a right to liberty? And do we have a right to pursuit of freedom and happiness? Because the truth of the matter is the very second that we decide that one person doesn't, and that's the question here, is personhood. The question, as soon as we realize that one person doesn't, the truth of the matter is none of us do. None of us do. And once it's deemed that none of us do, and heaven help our country and our nation and our state, I ask you to support this bill and this measure before you. Many of you know I don't come to the well very often, but I just hope we'll make the right decision. I pray we make the right decision. Let's remove ourselves from this equation. Let's remove our grandstanding from standing at this podium and for our folks back home. And let's just take a moment to sit at our desk and say a prayer and ask God to give us direction and simply follow Him. That's what truly gave birth to a nation. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Abortion is a very complex and emotional topic. It's not black and white, because nothing about raising a child is black and white. Women get angry when a legislature that is almost 70% male considers legislation that has very serious repercussions for women, their health, their lives and livelihoods. That is because laws about forcing a woman to give birth when it may not be the right time for her or her family is not something that one can truly grasp, truly understand on a gut level until your life, your future, is the one under consideration. Maybe some men have had it hit them almost as hard when it was their girlfriend or daughter, but it is not the same thing. And that's how it was for me. Growing up, abortion to me seemed scary and like something immoral, something that people would only whisper about. But it was when I grew to be 17 or 18 years old that I fully comprehended the ramifications to my life if I had a baby as a teenager. I never had to make that decision, thankfully. But I realized at that time that it would have completely changed the trajectory of my life, of my education, of my career goals, and of my plans for marriage and family when the time was right. Men, by and large, cannot truly understand this the way women do, because it is not something that can happen to them and throw off the course of their lives. Throughout the history of humankind, it is women who have done the work of giving birth to the next generation, and the large majority of the work raising children. So we take umbrage when men tell us that we have to give birth and spend the next 18 years raising that child if we don't want to or if we can't. Access to abortion and contraception means a woman can take charge of her educational and career goals. The ability to put off having a child and to decide when the time is right to have a family has a very powerful impact on a woman's economic stability and mobility. Affordable quality childcare is currently a huge problem in our state. According to a study released last fall by the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce and the Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students, or GEARS, over a quarter of Georgia's parents of children under 5 reported a significant disruption to their or a family member's employment, quitting, not taking or greatly changing a job in the past year. This study found that these challenges lead to at least $1.75 billion in economic activity annually lost, and an additional $105 million in lost tax revenue. The cost of childcare for an infant or toddler in Georgia exceeds 40% of the earnings of a low-income family. Since this is already a problem for our state and many of its families, if the state of Georgia limits the ability of women to make personal reproductive decisions, then it follows that we also have an obligation to ensure that mothers have the necessary resources to support their children. If the state is going to mandate that a woman give birth, It must also mandate or pay for paid maternity leave and high-quality childcare starting when the baby is 4 weeks old until he or she begins kindergarten to ensure that the mother's education and career is not derailed by the state's mandate that she give birth to the child. I had an amendment to that effect, but was unable to present it. Since the majority party is interested in establishing the rights of fetuses at conception, why should the concern and support of the rights and livelihood end at birth? If the majority party is genuinely invested in the sanctity of life, they would also prioritize access to health care, Medicaid expansion, paid family and medical leave, affordable child care, and other public policies that support maternal health. However, Georgia has one of the highest rates of child poverty in the country at over 20%. We are worse than all states but 3 others. That's pathetic. Our child poverty in this state, as large as we are and as large as our economy is worse than every state other than 3. And it's over 20%. The government, which means us, clearly is not doing a good enough job of taking care of the children who are already here. There are serious legal and logistical concerns as well surrounding this bill, especially its recognition of fetuses as people with rights equal to the women carrying them. If it were ever attempted to be implemented, it would open up a legal and ethical minefield. The implications could mean that there would no longer be an ability to use reproductive assistance like in vitro fertilization, and there could be an imposition of all kinds of restrictions on the lives and freedoms of pregnant women. First on the list of unworkable problems in the legislation is the mandate that the father pay for medical and pregnancy-related expenses. How do we know who the father is? The technology isn't there for safe paternity tests that early in a pregnancy. The tax deduction for the fetus is another, which of course has a fiscal impact. Talk about being ripe for tax fraudsters. I've heard no discussion about how we intend to address that problem. What about women who use drugs or engage in other unsafe or risky behaviors while pregnant? Once a child is born, the state has the Division of Children and Family Services to step in when a child is endangered by the actions of its parents. If the state, through this legislation, is extending the same rights to unborn children, it follows that the state will need to investigate or surveil women who engage in behavior that could be detrimental to their fetus. Would it be possible at this point for the woman to lose guardianship of her fetus while it is still inside of her? What if the person claiming to be the father thinks that the mother is an unsafe mother? Could he be granted custody by a court? Could the pregnant woman be prevented from traveling across state lines if the putative father believes that the mother is attempting to kidnap the fetus? Could a woman be locked up or surveilled for the duration of her pregnancy? If she engaged in unsafe behaviors and miscarried, could she face murder or manslaughter charges? Will we now have a new department of fetal protection at DFACS? What about a mother who says she had a miscarriage, but someone suspects that perhaps she truly had an abortion? How will our state go about investigating that? Will law enforcement search her home, seize her phone and computer to determine her intent? What about women who may not do something as dangerous as abusing drugs during pregnancy, but aren't careful about taking their prenatal vitamins, or they might eat foods during pregnancy that doctors recommend they not eat, like foods high in mercury, such as tuna, processed meats, and unpasteurized cheeses? Recommendations to women during pregnancy are constantly evolving. They are very different between my 2 pregnancies, which were only 2 1/4 and 3/4 years apart. How will the government determine which recommendations need to be enforced by the state against a pregnant woman as the government steps in to take charge of the fetus. These and many other questions remain unanswered, but they are very real and very significant issues. We have crises in our state of maternal mortality, infant mortality, child poverty, affordable child care, a serious shortage of OBGYNs and doctors in rural Georgia. We should address those issues. Issues that impact children who are already here. That is what we should spend our time on. This is a difficult issue. It's a tough issue, it's an emotional issue. But women realize that life is not black and white. We realize that abortion is not black and white, but very, very gray. I urge you to vote against this bill. Women can listen to information, evaluate it, and come to our own wise decisions. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 17th